It's important for people to know we need to turn over 1% of our red blood cells every day. And it amounts to 200 billion red blood cells. We have a lot of red blood cells in our body, but 1% need to come offline every 24 hours. And the part that's mind-numbing is that it only takes 25 milligrams of iron to create 200 billion red blood cells.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Christa Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together. All right, today on the Less Stressed Life, we have back Morley Robbins, who is widely known or was or is known as the Magnesium Man. He's also the creator of the Root Cause Protocol, which is how I feel that he's more widely known now, and the founder of the Magnesium Advocacy Group. He has a BA in biology from Denison University and an MBA in healthcare administration from George Washington University. He transitioned from a 32-year career in hospital administration to focus on natural healing after a personal health crisis. He's conducted over 7,500 consults worldwide, emphasizing the critical roles of magnesium, copper, and iron in health, and his work aims to address chronic fatigue and disease by correcting mineral imbalances and oxidative stress through the Root Cause Protocol. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to our discussion.
So on May 7th, the episode or 8th that week, we had an episode that came out about vitamin D and how we have been oversimplifying vitamin D. And I know that your true desire was to talk about copper. And so here today, we're talking about copper. And last episode, we opened with talking about your frozen shoulder, how you met your wife, Dr. Liz, and how it's changed your trajectory from I don't do witchcraft to, my goodness, there's a lot of other things. And it's been quite a rabbit hole would be an understatement probably from there. And I wonder, when did all of this kind of start? What year was it when you started the mineral rabbit holes or the natural healing rabbit holes?
2009.
2009. All right. So we're in 2025 now. So a good amount of time, quite some time, over a decade and a half. So you were first, we talked about this in the bio, you were first, I'll call it obsessed with magnesium, I think, right? You were known as the Magnesium Man. You had this Magnesium Advocacy Group. And how long was that part of the rabbit hole? Because now there's a focus and a switch to copper. And I want to understand, because we could spend an entire episode talking about magnesium. Of course, there's over 3,000 biochemical reactions. And so I don't know how long you want to stay on magnesium. And of course, they all dance with each other to some extent, of course. So how long were you in a deep dive on magnesium before you had some epiphanies around copper?
It was probably about 5 years. I started with two key questions. Why is everyone so sick? And how's anemia possible on a planet where iron is the number one element? Which makes no sense at all. We don't have to get into that right now. And my focus was around stress. And we're all under stress. There's nowhere on the planet. If you're above ground, you're under stress. We all have varying degrees of stress. COVID was global stress. It was an insane time. But people, I don't think, put it into the context of what I call the magnesium burn rate. The more stress we're under, the more we're going to lose magnesium, but there's a very specific reason why. That we go right into fight or flight. When you're under stress, you're either fighting the bear or you're running from the bear. And when you're fighting the bear, you better have a lot of adrenaline and cortisol. And same if you're running from it. But what people don't know is that there's a metabolic price to pay for that. And what took me many years, 4 or 5 years, after I was focusing on magnesium, I was very arrogant about it. I was just insufferable. And one practitioner finally said, "Well, if it was that easy, if just taking magnesium would solve the problem, we would have figured that out." And I, of course, responded, "You don't understand it the way I do." He was right. I was wrong. And what I continued to research was what is causing this magnesium. It isn't enough to say that we have stress and it's going to cause B vitamins to be depleted and magnesium depleted. I really wanted to know why. What's the mechanism of action? It's very simple. There are kinase enzymes, they're stress enzymes, heat-sensitive enzymes that cleave phosphate off so it can get energy to respond to stress. And the best definition of stress I've ever heard comes by way of Mark Hyman. And it's something he said many years ago. Stress is the body's inability to make energy for the mind to respond to its environment. It's a beautiful definition of stress. And at the end of the day, we got to make energy. We can't make energy to respond to the stress. We're gonna pay a price, and we're gonna lose ground as a result of that. And when the stress is chronic, people don't realize that under acute stress, again, you have this adrenaline and cortisol response. But adrenaline drives iron deeper into the tissue. That's a good thing to know. And cortisol, increases the production of metallothionein 4 to 5-fold. Well, why is that a problem? Because metallothionein binds up copper 1,000 times stronger than it binds up zinc. And we live in a very zinc-centric society now, and copper's toxic. But you cannot make energy without copper. And in fact, it's in the literature. People haven't taken the time to study it, but it's well chronicled that zinc kills complex 4 of the mitochondria. Oh, I didn't know that. So the evolution of my thinking took place over several years, and I began to realize that it was the stress-induced impact on these minerals, but the greatest stress on planet Earth, hands down, is the stress of iron and oxygen. Oxygen is the second most reactive element on the planet after fluorine gas. It's not our friend. We can't live without it, but we can't age without its oxidants. And iron, it's 36% of the Earth's composition. There's a lot of iron on this planet, and now we're adding iron in our food, in our supplements, in our fusions, and people don't realize what price they're paying. But there's only one element on the planet that can regulate both oxygen and iron at the same time, and that's copper. That's what makes copper stand alone in its metabolic importance, because it can regulate those two, keep them in proper balance inside the body, inside the tissue, inside the mitochondria, and allow the creation of water, because that's really what happens inside the mitochondria. They actually are water wheels. And if there isn't enough copper, they become ferrous wheels, referring to the ferrous form of iron. And when you lose the ability to make water, you lose the ability to release energy. The creation to turn O2 into 2 molecules of water is the most important obligate chemical reaction on the planet to make energy. Can't release energy any other way. So I began to really fixate on that and began to understand the vulnerability we have as a species if we don't have minerals in general in our diet, but especially if we don't have magnesium and copper. And the copper's got to be bioavailable. And that's code, or it's got to be complex with its enzymes. If it's not hooked up in ceruloplasmin, if it's not hooked up in dopamine beta monooxygenase, if it's not hooked up in the PAM enzyme, and we can go on for a couple of days talking about the different copper enzymes, but we won't. But there are many, and they're not taught for a reason. because it kills the business model of organized medicine. The less you know about copper, the better off big pharma is, the better off doctors are. And that's a very annoying thing to say, but it's true.
I want to just stop and unpack for a moment the difference between some copper supplements and bioavailable copper. You just talked about it, but I don't want to go past it too fast because I think it could be, once we get into, as you very well know, once we get into minerals, there's a lot of nuance around, okay, Morley, you've just told me why I should care. I think we'll try to highlight those pieces again. You just told me a little bit about why I should care. I can't even make energy without copper. That's one of the sales pitches to me for copper. Copper is the only thing that can regulate some oxidizing or aging substances that include iron and oxygen. Would that be another sales point for copper? Can't make energy without copper. Can't regulate, or copper is the main thing that can regulate these two other pro-aging ingredients. What's another sales pitch for? I know there's a lot of sales pitches, but I was just trying to underline a few of the sales pitches for copper and then unpack some other stuff.
Copper clears exhaust. There's always exhaust coming off. Anytime we're driving a car, anytime we're making energy, there is a residual amount of exhaust. That superoxide or hydrogen peroxide needs to be turned into a usable form. That's copper. Thank you very much. Copper colors everything. The melanin pigment is copper dependent. It relies on an enzyme called tyrosinase. And all the colors, what they like us to focus on is our hair and our eye and our skin. So it's the organs you need to be worrying about. The heart needs to be red. The liver needs to be brown. The gallbladder needs to be green. The spleen needs to be purple. And that color dictates its frequency and its function. It's very important. Copper connects everything. 45% of our connective tissue, 45% of our cells are connective tissue. And there's one enzyme called lysyl oxidase that knits collagen, which is strength, with elastin, which is flexible. And it's a zipper-like function, brings those two together so that our connective tissue, our blood vessels, our ligaments, fascia, all of the connective tissue needs to come together with lysyl oxidase. Nobody knows about that. And there's probably 8 or 9 others, but that gives people a much broader understanding. I think one of the most important is it conducts electricity. It's really good. When the Morse code came out, when the telegraph came out, they first used iron wire until they discovered that copper was 3 times faster. And there's a German acupuncturist who claims that the meridians that run our body are lined with copper. So it's just, and in the early life forms, before there was a nervous system, copper was the nervous system. Copper was the communication. And I think the other one that I think is worth noting is there are hundreds of what are called signaling peptides in our body. People have heard of their sex hormones, steroid hormones, but they've also heard of things like insulin. They've probably heard of amylin. They may have heard of they've heard of hepcidin. But there are things like oxytocin, vasopressin, cholecystokinin, and there are hundreds of peptides like that the body, our body, makes them like parked cars. Is your car in the driveway of any value? No, not until you turn it on and you can get on the highway. Does it become valuable? There's one enzyme again. It's called the PAM enzyme. It stands for peptidyl glycine, alpha amidate monooxygenase. Wow. I get $1.
That was a mouthful.
No, I get $1 every time I say it. But it is, after cytochrome C oxidase to make water, the ability of PAM to activate these hormones is profoundly important. And why is that significant today? What do you think the buzz is about peptides? We don't have the copper to turn them on, So they're selling us turned on peptides because they know we don't have the copper because of the changes in the diet, food system, and the farming system. And so we're bumping up against extinction level events that most people don't know about. Because if you can't make energy, if you can't turn on your signaling peptides, if you can't communicate, you're not going to make it. And that sounds draconian, but I'm trying to get people's attention.
Yeah.
And copper stands alone. And everyone loves to get all excited about boron, cadmium, and molybdenum. And wait a minute. There's a pecking order. Copper's at the top.
So I want to cover a couple specific topics, and we can go whichever place next. I thought we were going to go to, I think we'll go to copper supplements versus bioavailable copper. And then we'll talk about how people understand it in themselves, which usually we refer to testing to understand things we cannot understand sometimes, but we can unpack what that sort of looks like. But let's go back to copper supplementation versus bioavailable copper. And I think this is going to lend itself nicely to a new hot topic, which is copper peptides as well, because you just brought it up. So I want to talk about, you started to talk about this, and then we wanted to highlight what are copper's big selling points. But let's talk about, and so you already covered a little bit that bioavailable copper is a copper complex with enzyme processes. So will you go into that a little bit more? Because sometimes we hear that I need copper, and so then the solution is to supplement with copper. That's just something, it's just the natural thing that happens in our human brains. And so I want to understand more the varieties of copper supplements on the market versus bioavailable copper, and then I'll prompt you if we don't tie in copper peptides in there, which I feel is a slightly different angle, potentially.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of buzz about copper 10 years ago. I've done my small part to stimulate people's awareness about it. Now there's about 50 different supplement companies promoting copper, which I think is great. Rising tide raises all boats. I think it's fine. The key, though, is, and unlike magnesium, which I absolutely love and use it daily, and still use Jigsaw's SRT. It's a great product. But the body knows what to do with magnesium as a standalone mineral, and then it gets complex with other enzymes.
Did you say it doesn't know what to do with it as a standalone, or it does? It does.
And it gets complex with ATP. The biggest use of magnesium is it's magnesium ATP. Magnesium is between the second and third phosphate. And when the kinase enzyme cleaves off the phosphate, that's why magnesium goes into the urine. That's the magnesium burn rate, is the actual loss of magnesium. But copper's different. Copper is a very sophisticated network of chaperones and transport mechanisms to get copper into the cell and into the mitochondria, into the lysosome for recycling of ferritin or other components of the cell. It's a very sophisticated process. And there's a very important network of enzymes that are used to load copper into its enzymes. And those are called copper loading enzymes ATP7A and ATP7B. 7B is what makes the master antioxidant protein ceruloplasmin, which I'm sure we'll talk further about. It's very important. It's the master antioxidant inside the body. Glutathione is the master antioxidant in the cell. And melatonin is the master antioxidant inside the mitochondria. These are very important chemicals, but they're all copper dependent. People don't spend the time talking about that. And the ATP7B, principally in the liver, but other tissue as well, but principally in the liver, is loading copper into the ends of the protein ceruloplasmin. But the mechanism to turn on those copper-loading enzymes is retinol. And retinol is out of favor now. Oh, we're supposed to suck down vitamin D, and we're supposed to be afraid of retinol because it's toxic. Wink, wink. And this has been going on for a century now, but they move the cheese and tell us not to do this and do that. And people fall for it every time. It's like, oh, they did it again. They moved my cheese again. And we're like, oh, yeah, but maybe this next time they're serious. No, stop thinking about it, please. So retinol is very important for these copper-loading enzymes. And the ATP78 loads all the rest. There are probably about 30 different critical enzymes that are copper dependent. But it's the order of magnitude that's difficult to impress. We have, at the risk of overwhelming people with big numbers, we have 100 trillion cells in our body. Okay, that's a lot of cells. But we have 40 quadrillion mitochondria. Okay, that's about 500 per cell. And some cells have as little as 500. And there's some neurons that have as many as 2 million mitochondria. And so when we say that, oh, there's only one enzyme, cytochrome C oxidase, that converts oxygen into water, it's happening all over the body. It's like every cell has hundreds of these mechanisms, but we tend to downplay that. We don't think about the enormous importance of that one enzyme. And loading copper into lysyl oxidase, loading copper into the PAM enzyme, loading copper into tyrosinase, loading copper into amine oxidase, and on are really important activities nobody knows about. And the buzz, on social media is we're anemic and we're copper toxic. And it's just, we live in a world of 1984. Everything's upside down and backwards. And that is not true. And the body has very sophisticated ability to regulate its copper. And when copper becomes unbound from its protein, ceruloplasmin, there's a reason for that. It's trying to activate the immune system, principally the function of the neutrophils. That's a very important thing to know. And so the mechanism of copper is not known. I would equate it to if you've ever walked around a lake and seen ducks swimming in that lake. You see these beautiful birds sitting on top of the water, and they just look so majestic as they move through the water. And we don't think about the thrashing of their feet so that they can keep moving in that water. When the thrashing is taking place in our body, is copper trying to regulate iron and oxygen. And we've never been exposed to that level of detail. And so we've been taught to believe in disease. There is no disease. It doesn't exist. What does exist is stress-induced mineral dysregulation. It causes metabolic dysfunction that leads to symptoms, leads to energy loss, that leads to symptoms. And the symptoms lead to a label which gets tattooed on our forehead. And then we go to the internet and look up that label, say, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I have. I've got diabetes. I've got Sjogren's disease. I've got arthritis. I've got appendicitis. But they don't stop to say, was there more to the story? Could there be an energy crisis in that tissue that's not allowing for proper communication? Could the signaling peptides be blocked from doing their job? And is the iron being properly recycled in my body? The 2.5 million red blood cells that need to be turned over every second of every day. Is my body minding the store? Is there enough copper to do that? And that's the part that I think is missing. And it's not wildly difficult to understand. It's new. There's a lot of moving parts. And so people, since the beginning of time, will believe a simple lie than the complex truth. It's easier to believe I'm anemic than actually your copper is dysregulated and your iron is stuck in the tissue. What does that mean? The whole thought process comes to a standstill. So I think that the idea of historically, we got copper in our diet. It was very prevalent in organ meats, very prevalent in shellfish, nuts and seeds, broad leafy green vegetables. Those were the principal sources of copper. Snails were the jet set. But over time, the availability of that copper has been challenged by the farming system. That after the First World War, it was NPK that blocked copper uptake. And then in the last 50 years, we've had the challenge of farming being exposed to glyphosate.
What did you call the first one? MPK?
NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It was used in munitions during the First World War, and there was a whole lot left over. So they turned it into a fertilizer. Wink, wink. But it blocks copper uptake in the root system of the plant. And that's not my idea. It's Andre Voisin, world-renowned biochemist, whose hobby was being a dairyman. He loved milking cows. And he wrote a very important book called Soil, Grass, Cancer, where he outlined this concept that takes your breath away when you realize how prevalent NPK was in farming for decades. And so the access to these critical minerals has changed over the course of our lifetime. And it's out of sight, out of mind. If you don't know about it, you don't think about it. But once you learn about it, then you start saying, wait a minute, what do I need to do? And that's really what this conversation is trying to help people understand, that there is more to the story. And so the challenge we've got now is, how do we restore these minerals, but specifically copper, so that we can get the full benefit of its actions in our body? And for a long time, people would rely on the diet. I don't know that you can rely on the diet anymore because of the impact of glyphosate worldwide, because it's a copper chelator. And it's not a casual copper chelator. Glyphosate chelates copper 1 billion times faster than it chelates calcium or magnesium. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
It chelates copper 1,000 times faster than it chelates iron or zinc. And again, we're back to big numbers.
And this is good, but I want to understand, and we're dancing around a little bit on how we ended up copper deficient. And we're now talking about whole food sourcing and how whole food sourcing may not be enough to replete. And I know that I've got some questions coming up that I know will come up for people, because we don't have a universal agreement whatsoever online around copper. And so I want to make sure we understand why whole food copper, or why bioavailable whole food supplementation, or however, why bioavailable copper versus copper supplementation. And is there a place for a couple milligrams of copper supplementation? Because the reality is that there's people online that promote very large amounts of copper now as well. And so this is, if someone was out there just looking on the internet, it could get confusing. And so I want to make sure we definitely underline the main difference. And I feel like, I think you were referring to this. So do you consider copper a car? Is that the analogy that you use, or is it something else?
What I was referring to earlier is copper enables the car to get started. That's really much, and the car being the signaling peptides. The challenge we've got, Christa, is there's not a really good way to measure copper status in the body. Let me digress real quick.
I love how the camera follows.
Yeah, the camera. It's fun. It's a little camera. Good boy.
Yeah, it's fun.
So I'll make sure you get a copy of this article.
So the article is called Plasma Peptoglycine Alpha Amidating Monooxygenase, PAM. So plasma, it's PAM, and ceruloplasmin are affected by age and copper status in rats and mice.
Okay. So this is an article written by Joseph Prohaska in 2005, world-renowned copper expert. But what he's doing is he's revealing that these two enzymes, the ceruloplasmin and the PAM enzyme, are a true biological clock for humans, particularly as it relates to aging. I've been I just found that article 2 days ago. I thought I died and gone to heaven because it reveals what they knew 20 years ago about how to measure true bioavailable copper status.
Tell us.
No, neither of the tests is allowed to be done.
Both
tests are against the law.
Why?
Why? Because it blows up the big pharma model.
What is the test? Just to try to understand, though, did he discover a test and then it's not on the market? I don't understand fully.
I don't know what the test for ceruloplasmin has existed since the 40s. He didn't discover that test. The test for the PAM enzyme has existed since the early 80s. That was developed by Betty Eiper and Richard Maines at Johns Hopkins. He didn't discover either test, but what he was doing was creating an interface between the two tests to say, wow, do we have a way to measure copper status in mammals that's never been done before? And lo and behold, we do. But we're not allowed to do it. And so your listeners are going, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound fair. Welcome to the world of organized medicine, where things are mandated left and right to benefit the corporations and to keep us enslaved. And people don't realize the power of bioavailable copper to guarantee sovereignty. See, if everyone wants to feel better, they want their health. What health has become in America is symptom relief. Symptom relief is not health. It's sovereignty. I don't need a doctor. I'm on my own. I've got a good diet and I can generate energy to the extent that I want to. And I don't need an ologist for every part of my body. That is true health, where you rise above the demand of the practitioner. And most people think, well, if I could just make pain stop, I'd feel better.
I understand, right? As humans, everyone wants to treat the thing. I am a huge fan of health autonomy. I think when we get to a place where we're in some homeostasis, or I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say it like that. I think that health autonomy comes with experience, putting in repetitions, experimenting with yourself, a lot of details, right? I think health autonomy is a journey, and you call it health sovereignty, and I think they're similar to me. It's definitely a topic I care a lot about, is listening to your body and listening to the message it shares over testing. And yet, I'll bring this in here because you bring up, I can understand how we are as humans and I'll use a couple examples. When people take magnesium, they almost immediately feel better, given the right kind. No matter what, people can take magnesium and say, I feel different if I have enough magnesium. Many people, I would say that's a pretty common, there's some because it does many pretty quick things.
But as soon as you stop taking magnesium, you don't feel better.
Yeah.
And the problem is, what's causing the magnesium loss? It's unchecked iron, unchecked oxygen that's supposed to be regulated by copper. And so the intake of magnesium is lovely to keep your symptoms at bay. The minute you stop, symptoms come back.
I appreciate completely that you interrupted to include that, because a lot of what we're describing here needs repetition, or we need to think about it from different angles. And so I appreciate that a lot. And then when people take copper in, they do not feel immediately better. And yet they need it to stop losing the magnesium. So I bring that up just because as humans, it's tricky to want to have the stamina to take something if we don't feel different, or if we don't see a measurable change. And so one of the things we were just talking about was, how do you measure copper status? There are some, even you have some recommendations, at least historically, at least as part of the root cause protocol, for measuring copper status that includes this protein that we have not fully cracked open yet, which is ceruloplasmin. So I don't know if you want to go there. You want to talk a little bit about measuring that. I know you were just talking about it a bit, but these are natural human. I want to be the curious listener and interviewer, and I want to also say, I also want to be the advocate of, oh yeah, but, right? These are how our human brains are going to sometimes process these things. So these are a couple of those basic principles of, okay, how can I understand this in a way that makes sense to me?
So let's go back to the 1930s. The average American diet had 4 to 6 milligrams of copper daily. By the 1960s, it had dropped to 2 to 5. Not a big drop, but a drop. Do you know what the RDA for copper is today in 2025?
Probably not very much at all.
9/10 of 1 milligram.
Yeah, because usually with supplementation, it's usually just 1 to 2 milligrams. So these numbers don't surprise me, and usually the RDA is much less than that.
But the message is the reason why copper doesn't work is because people aren't taking enough. Now, I'm not advocating 20 milligrams. I'm advocating maybe we need to go back to that 4 to 6. Maybe we need 6 to 8. The upper tolerable limit, according to the NIH, is 12 milligrams. And so people have been trained, like circus bears, to be very cautious about copper. Oh, it's going to make you toxic. No, that's not true. That is pure narrative as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of very sophisticated research to back that up. And the people, when we realized we were onto something with the glucose protocol, this goes back to circa 2011, 2012. When we were starting to talk about copper, people started to take it. They were eating beef liver for the first time in their lives. And then they found out they had more energy than they knew what to do with. Found out they didn't need to take thyroid meds anymore. You can take magnesium all day long. It's not going to touch the thyroid. And so suddenly people are like, hey, I can get stuff done. And then we began to say, wait, what is going on? We hadn't pieced it all together by that point. And so I think we got to be really careful about, well, I feel better on magnesium. I don't feel better on copper.
Yeah.
Let's talk about dosing. And let's talk about the stress that you're under. And more importantly, let's talk about the fact that you're iron toxic, even though it shows low on the blood. And if you, in order to really unleash the energy in the human being, you've got to donate blood regularly. Even if you're a menstruating woman, you've got to donate blood. Maybe it's only a couple times a year. But otherwise, if you're a menopausal woman or a guy, you should be doing it quarterly because it's a tonic. It's like changing the oil in your car. And it has an amazing ability to revitalize the physiology of the blood, which is what's delivering our oxygen that we can't live without. And we better have the copper there to activate it. And the part that everyone's missed with anemia, which I think it's almost complicated. Body's not stupid. Why would hemoglobin go down? Because the body's really smart. It knows there isn't enough copper in the tissue to activate the oxygen that's being carried by the hemoglobin. So let's downregulate hemoglobin production to match the amount of copper we've got. And people don't think about that. It isn't an iron issue. That's all postmodern narrative to get everyone to think they need more iron. There's so much iron in our environment, so much iron in our food, so much iron in our supplements. Is the iron bioavailable? Is it usable? If there isn't enough copper in your diet, it will not be usable, and it will get stuck in the tissue because the recycling system is not working.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've written lots of iron notes, and I want to come back to some of the blood donation conversation with iron. I know we are going to dance between them. I just want to make sure, as the listener, that I'll always get these questions answered. And so when we think about, I am a huge fan of dosing as well, because I think about this with omega-3s all the time. People are like, oh, I tried omega-3s. I'm like, did you try it? Actually, effective dose, it makes a huge difference. And it's more than people usually think. So similarly with copper. And so part of the conversation is we've talked about some of the foods that are rich in copper.
Historically.
Yes. Organs.
No longer.
So that makes that
it's a very uncomfortable concept.
No, I agree. And a lot of the food-based, if there's a food-based supplement like organ complex, it doesn't usually show how much copper is in there. Same with chlorophyll, a huge thing I love as well. It doesn't really show. So it sounds to me, you haven't directly said it, but it sounds to me like there's room for the food-based source. Of course, there's always going to be room for the food-based sources, and it's always, by the way, I think this is a human thing as well. Always the food-based sources of copper, including organs, including chlorophyll, etc. It's going to look like several caps usually because food takes up more room. You put food in a capsule, and now it's a lot of capsules. But it sounds to me like you would say there's room for copper glycinate, for example, in at least a couple of milligrams potentially, in addition to bioavailable. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
There's a reason why the product Recuperate exists, which was to create a more bioavailable form that has the desiccated beef liver, which has cofactors that we don't fully know all the cofactors. It has spirulina, which is an amazing source of superoxide dismutase, which is a very important enzyme for people. It has turmeric to help us deal with the inflammation that everyone's battling. And it comes with and without boron. I think the Recuperate product is head and shoulders different than the straight up copper bisglycinate, which is just the copper because it doesn't have the cofactors. People don't realize that it's a unique mineral that is very sensitive to its cofactors. Its functionality is very sensitive to the cofactors. And there are different forms. We've got copper sulfate and copper chloride and copper gluconate. So some of the more notable, the GHK copper, which is what everyone's all excited about, the peptide form, that was discovered by Lauren Picker, it's a world-renowned copper expert who just died this past year, last February. But he discovered that in 1970. But it took him a long time to perfect it and make it available. I've never gotten any buzz from GHK copper. I've tried it. I've tried copper gluconate, didn't get any buzz from it.
Are you telling me you get a buzz from food-based copper?
I do. And for years I used a standard process, had a copper liver chelate, and they stopped making that, but probably 7 or 8 years ago. But Dr. Liz and I got that call from standard process. Said, we have you get the last 500 bottles, and we bought them all. We were using it so much that they wanted to make sure we had a supply. I still have 20 bottles downstairs.
Yeah, I wonder why they stopped making it.
I
Maybe
think
make assumptions.
they said it was quality control. I think what they were coming to realize is that there was a compromised amount of copper in the liver. And people don't realize what that means. And simply dousing or taking copper bisglycinate, it's better than nothing, but it's not the same as the food-based forms.
Yeah, I think that the takeaway that I'm hearing is that you probably will to be able to get to the amount of copper that you may need. And I think this is generally, you can apply this generally across the board, is that each nutrient is going to need cofactors typically. And so anytime you're dosing a standalone nutrient for a long time at a high dose, just generally speaking, you're going to potentially create other issues. And so therefore, maybe there's some room to dose that up initially to see how you do. Maybe initially means a month. Maybe you assess. I'm just throwing this in here for tangible experimentation purposes, but there's always got to be the food-based copper as well. And I say this as a person who sees low copper on hair tissue mineral analysis and sees challenges bringing it up on food-based copper.
I think that what's holding you back is you're not addressing the iron side of the equation. If people are not doing blood donations, the iron is blocking the copper, and that's the work of Jamie Collins at the University of Florida, Gainesville. It's very powerful, it's very effective, and everyone forgets to think about iron.
And if iron shows normal, and let's
it will always show.
It will always show normal.
The iron in the blood is not at all representative of iron in the tissue. And that's what Kapoor says. There could be 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows in the blood. That's just research in 2004 and 2005. And so this idea that the blood is representative of what's going on inside my body, we got to stop thinking that. It's not true.
I am referencing tissue iron, actually.
How are you measuring?
On hair tissue mineral analysis.
That's not a valid measure. Hair tissue, I love hair tissue mineral analysis. I'm a big fan. That is not an accurate measure of tissue iron. Why? Because the first thing they do to the hair sample is oxidize it. They burn it. So they freeze the oxidation state. And all you're seeing is O2. It was Fe2. You don't know what's going on with Fe3 or other forms of iron.
Well,
You don't know. The hair is not telling you what's happening in the liver or the kidney or the pancreas or the heart. It's not representative in that respect.
you are saying something I've concluded this year, which is there's only so much value testing can give you. However,
Mhm.
so if hair tissue mineral analysis is not accurate for iron and serum analysis is not accurate for iron, let's talk about how you would, and I'm going to bring up something else. We just talked about how people feel better on magnesium when they take it. And we're going to bump up against friction here no matter what, because when people have really low iron and they take iron, they feel better for a while. So we
Right.
need to let's talk about iron toxicity. Let's talk about how someone knows how they're actually doing with iron if no test is accurate. Maybe there is an accurate test. I'm not sure. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that. And let's talk about why people feel better on iron
Yeah.
supplementation.
It isn't that the testing isn't accurate. It's not complete. And so we have hemoglobin, ferritin, and serum iron, the three markers that are going to come back. And one can be off or all three can be off. But there's a reason why they're off, because there's not enough bioavailable food. It's very rare in this day and age for someone not to have enough iron in their diet. We need to get 24 milligrams of iron through our recycling system than 1 milligram from our diet. And today people are getting upwards of 18 to 25 from their diet. We don't know how the recycling system is working, but it's not where it needs to be. There's a famous study by Robert Hodges in 1979 where he tracked people who are involved in this iron study for over 3 years. And he was trying to demonstrate the importance of beta carotene and retinol in terms of regulating iron status. It's one of the most important studies I've ever read. And it shows exactly what medicinal iron, infused iron, does to create this false sense of recovery in hemoglobin, which only lasts for 6 weeks, goes back down, and the recovery doesn't really start until the patients are exposed to beta carotene and retinol, and then suddenly the hemoglobin takes off and then levels out where it's supposed to be around 13. And it's a very impressive study that you just have to sit with it, understand it.
Yeah.
But the feeling of feeling better is an illusion. It's a 6-week illusion. And what people do is they're like Tarzan. They go from one bind, 6-week bind, to another 6-week bind. And they're constantly going through this process. And if there is an ongoing need for iron, constant need for iron, then you've got a serious copper problem in your body. And people don't know that. And they think that, oh, I can take iron ad libitum as much as I want. When in fact, no, it's going to build up in your organs and it's going to wreak havoc, especially when you get older.
I agree with both. I've seen both scenarios, right? Where people who have, I'm going to say the word ferritin, less than 10, less than 5, that feel like death, that get an iron infusion, like I feel like I can function. And I've seen people who've been in that scenario and they do not feel better. And they do need cofactors as well as many other things as well. So I've just seen both of those scenarios play out multiple times. And I would say, like, from the human perspective, sitting there, right? You're not, for the human whose ferritin is 3 and gets an infusion and feels better, you wouldn't be able to convince them that the next phase is needed until that doesn't work and that they need these other cofactors. I'm just saying
again,
the human
I know.
experience.
But that's symptom management. That's not recovery. And what's completely ignored in the ferritin of 3 is what's ceruloplasmin status? What's the copper status? What's the zinc status? What we don't have access to is hepcidin. Because when ferritin is low, hepcidin is high. And hepcidin keeps iron locked in the iron recycling system, can't get out. There is no blood test for hepcidin. I test it every 6 months to see if it's available. And to me, it's a crime against humanity because ferritin and hepcidin are on sea salt. I know that from a conversation with Douglas Kell, who's a world-renowned iron expert. So that when ferritin's low, hepcidin's high, which means that iron is stuck in the tissue. And getting an iron infusion creates the sensation of feeling better, but it only adds insult to injury. I've got 2 clients who are both without the hemochromatosis gene, both who got multiple iron infusions to feel better because their ferritin is so low, and both now have hemochromatosis gene defects. So people have got to start thinking about what is the price I'm willing to pay to feel better, and maybe I should do it Mother Nature's way, not this artificial iron, forcing iron. I don't call them iron infusions anymore. They're iron invasions. They're very toxic to the body.
I want to mention you referenced the iron recycling system, and I talk to clients about the iron recycling system. So Morley was just saying that because of the iron recycling system, we need to input 1 milligram of iron while our body should produce the other 23 or 24 milligrams or whatever it is to get to the daily needs of iron that we need in our body. The nutrient cofactors, I just want to mention this because I do think that this is important because when I have people present with low iron based on their blood work, I am discussing iron recycling system and cofactors for creating iron in the body. But the nutrients that are involved in the system to make iron include magnesium, include retinol form of vitamin A, now, and include bioavailable copper. I want to remind us, because we've been talking at a level where I don't know that we've acknowledged this. Retinol is the animal-based form of vitamin A, right? So to get that, you either need to convert that in your body or consume it. And there's not a lot of food-based sources, not as many as we think of vitamin A as like carrots and orange things, but that's beta carotene. It needs to be converted into retinol. And we can get that through cod liver oil, which is in the root cause protocol, right? That's one of the reasons I'm sure that it's in the root cause protocol. But I just bring that up because you've mentioned the iron recycling system, which doesn't mean anyone knows what we're talking about there. And so I want to bring up that there are nutrient cofactors for creating in the body overall. It is hot weather season, and there is probably no better time than now to make electrolytes part of your daily routine. Electrolytes help you make energy and help get hydration into the cell so you aren't just peeing out what you put in. I've been drinking electrolytes for at least 5 years, and I'm always looking for a great tasting, high quality powder just to change up the flavors. This summer, I'm doing a lot of Electrolyte Supreme from Jigsaw. It's got a great complementary vitamin and mineral profile beyond the classic electrolyte minerals of potassium, sodium, and magnesium without any sugar or artificial colors. It tastes great, and it's probably my go-to for my kids, especially the lemon lime flavor as a hydrating lemonade for summer. You can get 10% off every single order at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's LESSSTRESSED10 to take 10% off of all of Jigsaw's incredible products, from Electrolyte Supreme to potassium and adrenal cocktails to cod liver oil and beyond. So go get yourself now and start hydrating.
It's important for people to know we need to turn over 1% of our red blood cells every day. And it amounts to 200 billion red blood cells. We have a lot of red blood cells in our body, but 1% need to come offline every 24 hours. And the part that's mind-numbing is that it only takes 25 milligrams of iron to create 200 billion red blood cells. And the reason why we can't process it is that in each milligram of iron, again, these numbers are going to just go over people's head, but each milligram of iron has 6 times 10 to the 19 atoms of iron. It's a lot of iron in a milligram of iron. And so far better for us to recycle existing iron and introduce new atoms of iron in a body it is struggling with copper. And the process of recycling, any process of recycling the human body requires copper. Autophagy requires copper. It's very
That's
simple.
important. That's important too. Autophagy, right? Your cellular janitor in your body. When we don't have our cellular janitor, we just have a lot more crap to deal with and push around.
That's right. Very true.
I'm smiling. I'm thinking fondly of the time I hemorrhaged during childbirth. About 13 years ago, my middle child just turned 13. And I remember calling my practitioner, who was very like Weston A. Price centric at that time, who recommended a couple of bottles of chlorophyll as the solution post hemorrhage. And I'm just thinking about this fondly. I'd forgotten about it. This was so long ago. I was thinking about it fondly because what a great source of copper to support iron recycling and red blood cell
Good source of copper. But what your body was telling, the wisdom of your body was, hey, Christa has too much iron. This is a chance to get rid of it.
Oh, it was medically induced.
Well,
it's Pitocin.
Okay, so the thing is, that's the catch. Pitocin is not oxytocin. Oxytocin is what Mother Nature makes. It needs to be activated by the PAM enzyme. Pitocin comes out of a test tube. The function of oxytocin is twofold, severalfold. It's the love hormone. It's the bonding hormone. But it is, in fact, the chemical that cinches and closes off the blood vessels. It's the mechanism to bring the mom back to morphology that she had before the pregnancy. And you can see right away in women who are carrying an infant who are bigger than they were before they got pregnant, that they have no oxytocin in their body because they've not come back to their ideal body weight. And so Pitocin is a synthetic joke compared to oxytocin, which is what the body knows how to make naturally, but it requires activation by the PAM enzyme, which requires copper. And I think the challenge is getting people to realize that the synthetic is not the same as the real deal. We've grown up with plastic wood panels in our car, thinking that's wood. It's not wood. And so we've got to get beyond this illusion that we're okay. And the amazing thing about oxytocin is it's 9 amino acids long. Just for context, insulin is 45 amino acids long. So 1/5 of insulin is oxytocin. And if you transpose 2 amino acids, you get what's called vasopressin. And why is vasopressin important? Because it stops high blood pressure. Again, we're back to the body having the wisdom of knowing what to do, but if it doesn't have the mineral key to turn on these hormones, no can do.
Yeah. On this note, when we think about the pecking order, you brought this up earlier. You said copper's at the top. And at least the way I learned HTMA analysis and root cause protocol, sodium, potassium came first. I don't think that there's a wrong place to put copper in. I think you can put it in immediately. Do you agree with that?
Say that again.
Can copper come in at any time without negative? Sometimes if you bring in magnesium, the concept is that it blocks maybe potassium being repleted.
I think great question. With magnesium, what you've got to be careful of is not overwhelming the sodium and causing adrenal fatigue, because they do run on that balance being together, and you can overwhelm the potassium side. The issue with copper, I think the most important thing is to bring it in with food, with your diet, with your regular diet. And I think as people are intrigued by this, what I would encourage them to do is just go to our website and read about the protocol. And there's a very specific set of things to stop doing, set of things to start doing. It's sequenced, and copper is in the first phase, but it's in sync with 4 other things. And just get people to realize that there's some method in our madness. But I've had clients just dive in and do the full RCP, and they've been fine. Yeah. I've had some clients be overwhelmed by it. So it depends upon their sensitivity to their situation. But yeah, I think for the most part, copper is fine. I would encourage people to make it part of this holistic trying to return to more balanced mechanism.
Yeah. That was a later question I had about simplifying things. We're talking about topics that buck the system a little bit right now. And while we're on the topic of iron, I'll share this, and I'm okay with this right now. I think the beauty of getting into health autonomy and not being I think that when you're in a health crisis, whatever that health crisis is, there is a level of desperation that humans have. There is a level of wanting results within a certain amount of time, being able to see changes. I am not in that phase. I am thankful. I've been through several of those phases. I am thankful I'm not in that phase. And because I'm not in a desperate, in a health crisis scenario, I can say that I can go about this without my logic being blocked. And so I'll just share with you because I think this is interesting. Both my husband and I, sometime, I don't know, the years blend together. I'm sure you don't have that problem. The years start to blend
Yeah,
together.
right.
I think it was probably a year, maybe a bit more ago, where the iron on our HTMAs, which you said is not accurate, were substantially higher than I'd seen anywhere else. Mine was 4 something. His
Wow.
was 7 something. This is atrocious. It should be like around 1 on this test.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so I hadn't really seen that on any other client. And I'm still discerning this. My theory is that it was due to, we have a cabin where all the soil is completely red and the water is held in a tank in the well share. And I think it's the water because it's happened after a certain frame in time, etc. And I'm thankful that I'm like totally freaking out, but I was very diligent around blood donations for a long time. And actually that brings me to a question I wanted to expand upon a little bit more. You talked about the importance of blood donations earlier. We didn't always have blood donations, right? Women get rid of blood when they're menstruating with their menstrual cycle. Men do not. I know that the iron has changed on the planet Earth over time. There's like a whole mechanism you go through in your book, so we don't necessarily have to unpack that. But when we're thinking about blood donations, which are the way to clear excess iron, there's other good ways to do that. And for me, I'm trying to discern, do I have any inputs coming in, right? Where the hell did this iron come from? Those are the questions I have for myself. And it's interesting because it's testing water, for example. It's not straightforward. I was trying to have this conversation with my mother-in-law last night. I'm like on a water testing journey this summer that is coming over from like past summer. It's a journey because there's not a good test. I want to know this and this. Where am I going to get that information? And so anyway, but talking about blood donations, we never used to have blood donations. Is there ever a time where you see that it's not the right time to do a blood donation? I don't know. What else do you want to say about the concept of blood donations has to do with clearing excess iron, right? That's built up. And is there anything else we want to cover with blood donations? I just felt like there was maybe a little bit more to say there.
I don't want to come across as being cavalier. Oh, just get a blood donation. But most people in North America, most people eating a Western diet have been exposed to so much iron they didn't know about, and either through food or supplements. And it isn't accurately represented in the testing. It's not. Great that hair test made you realize that, oh, I've got a water problem. But all too often, the only way to get you want to get really sophisticated on it, do a needle biopsy of your liver or do a test of 1.5 of your liver. Those are the two most
invasive.
The Tesla is not. The MRI is not invasive, but it's expensive. And the thing is, what number Tesla or hospital is using today? 7 Teslas. Hospital 7, it's Tesla 7.0. And the only one that picks up the iron is 1.5. So they've blown past the technology to find out, is iron a problem in the body? And again, it's just the system is so stacked against us being able to manage these are called redox metals. They're involved in reduction oxidation. What does that mean? It's involved in making energy, and they're passing electrons back and forth. And the circus that runs our body, the 3-ring circus, is copper, iron, and oxygen. And copper and iron are the only metals that interact with oxygen. And iron creates rust, and oxygen creates energy. And that's a good thing to know. And are there situations in laboratory settings where they can jury-rig the copper to create problems? Yes, and they do it all the time and blame copper for causing the diseases of the body, like cancer, but not tell you about the iron status, the raging iron status, that there's 5 times more iron in a cancer cell than the healthy cell next to it. They like to ignore that, keep that behind the curtain. And so I think that people are well advised to think differently about their symptoms. There's a reason why they have fatigue. There's a reason why they have aches and pains. There's a reason why they're having trouble sleeping. And I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts. It has more to do with copper, iron, and oxygen, and less to do with, well, I have sleep apnea, well, I have congestive heart failure, well, I have diabetes. These are all very significant symptoms, but they're all caused by the same 3-ring circus. And just depending upon where we carry our stress, it plays out in the body in different places. It's a very different way of thinking about the process of imbalance, metabolic dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, and just getting people to realize that there's a common point of origin.
Before we, and I don't know if we need to wrap up, before we do, I want to make sure I isolate the conversation around testing for copper, because when you take copper and you don't see a difference, it's hard for humans to know if it's hard for us to have stamina on something sometimes if we're uncertain. So I want to talk about that piece. I want to also talk about your lived experience a little bit there as well, but I also want to cover ceruloplasmin, which is going to just dance in there no matter what. So I think I've asked you this, or we haven't really, I don't know that we've arrived at this answer. If someone wanted to test their copper status, would there be an answer that is, okay, this is as good as we have right now?
Yeah. The metals should all be 100 in the serum. Zinc, iron, and copper. And that goes back to the 1930s. Otto Warburg, Hans Krebs, Dr. Schultz, LGM, these big names in mineral metabolism back in the day, back in the 20s and 30s. So they should all be 100. And in 1960, 2 professors of medicine from Harvard Medical School ended up in I still can't figure out why they did this, but they did important human ceruloplasmin studies in a AT&T laboratory in upstate New York. I'm not sure why they didn't do it at a laboratory in Cambridge, but for some reason they didn't. But Sternleib and Scheinberg, who then went on to go to Einstein Medical Center, very talented hematologists. What they discovered in 1960 is that copper should be 100, reaffirming the findings from the 30 years before, and that ceruloplasmin level should be 30, and that the ratio should be 3.33. Now here's where it gets exciting. When you're testing ceruloplasmin, the master antioxidant protein, there's 2 ways to measure it. There's height, the level, and its activity, or its IQ. So how tall are you, Christa?
5'6".
Okay, I'm 6 feet. So that means I'm smarter than you, right? Because I'm 6 inches taller. No, it doesn't mean that at all. And that's the problem with testing ceruloplasmin level, is it creates the illusion that if the ceruloplasmin is higher, it's better. And we're barred from knowing the activity level. Don't want us to know the IQ of copper because it reveals too much. And the copper, what often happens when the ratio is above 3.33, which is the ideal ratio, if it gets up into the 4s, maybe as high as 5, you know that there's inflammation in that body, which means they have too much iron. And the iron is coming out and it's causing the inflammatory process. If the ratio is below 3.33, what it's revealing is the body needs more copper, and it would be ever so much easier if we would be able to know the activity level, so we would know exactly what's taking place in our body. But the use of the ratio is very effective, and it's what it reveals is the level of stress that the individual is under. And I think the part that's missing in most medical programs or nutritional programs is it isn't just where the numbers are. What the numbers are revealing is, well, this person must be under stress. And then the conversation needs to start with, so what are you dealing with? What's causing you to be out of balance with your minerals? Because the minerals are a reflection of the stress level that the person's carrying. Because if you have stress in your world, you're going to have oxidative stress in your body. That's a given, well established. And what I think a lot of practitioners tend to overlook is this person in fight or flight, in a chronic state of fight or flight, that's keeping their energy production down, keeping their mineral dysregulation high, and not allowing them to get the full benefit of recovery. And I think that's where a lot of mistakes are made in conventional healing, is we're not looking at that emotional stress side as much as we should. We are just focusing on the numbers in the lab test.
Oh, 100%. We didn't even unpack that today. We're talking about that here all the time. I'm always talking about, for me, one of the biggest crises I see is unrealized stress, or just that chronic stress is the normal. It's hard to identify something when it's just become the norm. So
Right.
actually, and I don't know that I make this clear enough all the time to my clients. The reason I started completely changing how I was supporting clients around emotional stress was because I just couldn't handle continuing to see these depleted minerals. And then people are trying to take minerals, and it's like you feel better on the minerals, but you're not getting to repletion without adjusting the stress. That was when we saw the changes. But that's the hardest part. That's absolutely the hardest part.
Absolutely. It's because people don't
Easy
like
to take a supplement or to eat the food, especially when that's what you believe your problem is.
exactly. Yeah.
No one,
People
no
love to
one,
take, they
I,
love to pop a pill.
I love to say that I try not to tell people they have a problem they don't think that they have. It's like beating it just doesn't necessarily work, right? And that was my goal. Definitely the first conversation we had was I wanted to do my best job as possible to try to frame the conversation to allow for an open mind. That, hey, we're oversimplifying vitamin D. We do oversimplify iron. I think probably the sticking point for part of this conversation is people trying to identify it for themselves, right? And if there's not a home run test, to be honest though, is there a home run test for anything? There's very few home run
No.
tests in my opinion. I think you have to correlate. I'll say something that might be a little dissonant to what you said. It's like you have to be able to acknowledge that the symptoms are even more important than test results, right? Because many people have perfectly normal test results and they have lots of symptoms, and it's clearly there's something wrong if you have lots of symptoms. But the conversation is, how do we holistically bring systems into balance? To me, it's repletion, removing the things that are stressing the body, which I think we're aligned in generally.
Oh, yeah. I think the other is you've had kids, so you know the 5 habits of daily living. Did you get a good night's sleep? Did you wake up refreshed? Are you hungry? Are you able to make enough energy to get through the day? Are you able to eliminate your waste? And is your mood in keeping with your situation? Those are great markers. There's 5 markers that will tell you, am I in balance, in harmony with my life? You don't have to get super hyperbolic about testing. Just, hey, did I wake up feeling good? Did I feel refreshed? Do I have the energy? Did I have a good bowel movement today? Those are really good signs of homeostasis. And we don't need to be really sophisticated about that, just as a parent would monitor a child's activity on a daily basis.
I don't want to glaze past this. I feel that you may have just covered this, but I explicitly had someone want to know who does a lot of testing analysis and data analysis about ceruloplasmin. We talked about ceruloplasmin. We didn't necessarily define it as this protein that helps with transport. And maybe you want to say very different things. Maybe I'm misstating it, but ceruloplasmin is a test that you can check. You were just talking about that, but you were saying we cannot necessarily just look at the level. But the question I had received from someone to ask you was about, wow, it's hard to increase ceruloplasmin when it's low. And you just acknowledge that, oh, yeah, it might be actually hard to raise it. It's actually more about the ratio than it is about the level. Is that correct?
It's about the ratio. What often happens is people will have elevated ceruloplasmin, and as they get more aligned with their system and they're dealing with their stress, the ceruloplasmin number might actually go down. But that's actually a good thing, because if their ratio is better, the ceruloplasmin.
And I'm sorry, will you just refer the ratio is ceruloplasmin to copper?
Copper to ceruloplasmin. So get 100 units of copper to 30 units of ceruloplasmin. Ratio is 3.33. And I regard it as a logarithmic measure, so that when it goes up to 4 or 5, it's a big deal. It isn't just, oh, it's an incremental. It's a quantum change in function. But I think what we have to be careful about is those ceruloplasmin. It's responding to a lot of stress. It's the master antioxidant protein. And it is keeping track of 15 different substrates. It is keeping track of 9 different enzyme functions. And the one that's only written about in the literature is called ferroxidase, responding to iron. But people don't know its role dealing with histamines or dealing with amines in general, or dealing with phenol groups or diphenol groups. And so it's a very important mechanism of regulation. When the ceruloplasmin is not changing, what's important to know about our body, let's step back, the liver's over here. It's a big giant triangle, right? And the part that's closest to the midpoint of the body is a smaller triangle. And that's where ceruloplasmin is made, in that little triangle within the big triangle. But here's the catch. When we don't have enough copper in our diet, this little triangle here, get back here, this little triangle here fills up with iron. When did they first know that? 1928, in 2 separate studies at the University of Wisconsin and the University of Kentucky. And so if someone is bumping up against, oh, it's hard to get my ceruloplasmin up, it's not like trying to fill a beaker with water. You got to get the iron out of the liver. You got to get it moving, get it recycling, so that the body can catch its breath and reestablish its metabolic processes. And that's more complicated than a simple add more water and the beaker fills up. And that's what people want. People want simple. They're looking for the simple button all the time. And I get that. I really do understand that. But it's that the body is more sophisticated than that. But it's very straightforward if you know the fundamentals. And that's what we think we've laid out in the root cause protocol. So that resistance to rising ceruloplasmin is probably because your liver, more than likely, it's because the liver is struggling to make ceruloplasmin because it's filled with iron. And it's a very prevalent condition. And there's a company out of Australia, but it's now worldwide, and it's called FeriScan. Excuse me, FeriScan. And they do a test of 1.5, and they can tell you exactly how much iron you have in your liver. I don't know how much the test costs. I haven't done it yet. I'm intrigued. I'd like to do it. But the thing is, it's not like there's a higher reason why you're not making ceruloplasmin. It's going to be more finite. Do you have retinol in your diet? Do you have copper in your diet? Are you managing your stress? Are you dealing with your iron? Are there medications in the mix that might be getting in the way? It's a finite number of factors that are going to prevent proper, optimal recovery of ceruloplasmin.
Cool. That is helpful. Okay, so finally, maybe now, I don't want to glaze over. As I mentioned before, we don't universally agree about copper in the internet, in the world. So there's a new subset in the mineral, as minerals have taken more spotlight in the last decade, which is good. There are people that promote really large amounts of copper. We've talked about a little bit of the dance between supplementation and bioavailable and food-based, and some of the limitations with food-based just because of the way the food supply is. And I think importantly, and I see this with iodine too, it's just like we have a lot of things going against us to even be able to get that nutrient from the diet, or I don't know that steals is the right word, but it's displacing it maybe, or impacting it in some way where it's not able to be taken. However, there are people who there is a copper toxic corner as well. And I know you have opinions about this. And I have also seen people who say, wow, when I was dealing with copper toxicity, my mental state was not okay when I took anything with copper. And the only thing that helped was molybdenum, etc. And so I personally tend to I will either believe clients, I certainly want to validate any lived experiences. I have a tendency to believe clients as well as sometimes what do you call it, reorient them until actually here's maybe what's happening instead. And so you might have some thoughts on that also with copper toxicity, because my issue is I don't believe in invalidating people's how they're feeling around something. And so if someone's
No,
feeling like they're dealing with copper toxicity, which is usually going to look like severe mental stuff, and there's ways we look at that on hair tissue analysis. Where would that potentially come from? Maybe a copper IUD or copper pipes is the conversation that's been had. What's your take on this whole topic of copper toxicity stuck in tissue?
copper is really good at what it does. It's designed to mobilize iron. And when people have these nausea or racing mind, which are the two principal symptoms that people have when they take copper, they blame the copper and ignore the iron that's being released and mobilized in the tissue. Where is a lot of iron found in the body? In the stomach and the brain and the liver, of course, but the stomach and the brain. And so when copper comes into the ecosystem of our body, it's going to mobilize that iron. And so it is not copper toxicity, it's iron toxicity. And this perpetual need to blame copper, when in fact, copper's the general, copper's running the show. If we had 6 hours, I could really get into the metabolism of it and get people to realize, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I had never heard this before. Here's what I learned today. Here's today's There's a famous physician who loves to tell us to stop taking lectins because they're really bad for us. And I'm not going to name him by name.
We know who he is.
But we know who he is. I've always wondered, what is that mechanism? Because it's bothered me for years. And I finally
Lots of things like that.
No, I finally figured it out today. There's a specific peptide about this long. I haven't memorized it, but it starts with phytohemagglutinin is its formal name, and it's PHA. And it disrupts production of interleukin-2, especially in the spleen. And when that happens, it causes a rouleau in the red blood cells.
It causes what in the red blood cells?
Rouleau, stacking of red blood cells. That's a very bad thing because rouleau is found with inflammation, infection, and cancer. But rouleau means that the red blood cells are stuck together. They've lost their individuality and they can't get in the capillaries. So the tissue can't work. And all of this is because what's essential for making interleukin-2? Copper. Where is this particular form of lectin coming from? Red kidney bean, which has historically been a source of what? Copper. But in a post-glyphosate world, it doesn't have the copper. And so the lectin, the recommendation, dial back on the lectins because they know we're eating food that doesn't have copper. And it's causing rouleau, it's causing microclots. And what I learned in my time in London with Professor Douglas Kell, brilliant iron biologist, his whole presentation was on microclots. And he was talking about the need in the body to break down those fibrin clots. And so I
Was
Googled
this pre-2020 or post-2020?
Post-2020. This was 10 days ago when I was doing a presentation with him. What I'm Googling as he's talking, only to find out what is the most effective agent to break up rouleau and microclots. It's called ceruloplasmin, the master antioxidant protein that should be in our blood. And if you have a reaction to lectins, if you have rulo, if you're having negative reactions to your environment, you don't have enough ceruloplasmin. That's what that's telling us. And so people are not aware, they're not fully aware of the genius in our body, the absolute innate intelligence that we are designed with, because the system is designed to keep us fat, dumb, and happy, sell us bad food, sell us supplements, sell us medications, make a lot of money, and laugh all the way to the bank. And it's a very, still cynical one, but that's where we are as a system. And so that realization, I finally pieced that together this morning. I went, okay, we wouldn't tell people to stop taking lectins. We tell people, increase your copper so you can deal with the lectin.
And deal with your histamines, which I like as well.
Right.
I see that more prevalent than I rarely have people concerned about lectins, but histamine is always an issue for people I'm working with. And so, yeah. So for that reason alone, I am a fan of copper. For that reason alone, it's that big of an issue to myself or clients for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I want to actually finalize. I think I'm finalizing. I want to ask you, with this lived experience, I think going back to the beginning, you were obsessed with magnesium for 5 years. You started this whole process in 2009. So by 2015, at least, or the last 10 years, interested in copper by my estimates of your conversation. Maybe it's not that long.
At least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I feel, to be honest, your book that came out, I don't know, a few years ago, I don't know when, is largely is
2021
is a significant, I'll call it, summary of some of this, or really much more expansive than this conversation. But the point is, you've been on this train for a while. You've been in this rabbit hole for a while around copper, so quite some time. Definitely long enough to give us some input on what do you see when people introduce copper. After how long? We've talked a little bit about dose. Because I was gonna ask how much, but we covered that. Maybe we need 5 milligrams more. Maybe we need twice that much for a bit or something like that, even though normally it's around a couple of milligrams. And the issue is, in food, it's hard to measure, even though food is king. So that's somewhat, we talked a little bit about that, how much. You are welcome to amend if I misstated there, of course. But what do you see when people are introducing copper after how long? I know it's all different for different things. I know that there's an entire protocol, but I wanted you to share, we as humans, we also like evidence.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. I've had people get better in 3 days. I've had people take 9 months. Biggest variable is, it's a very sincere, it's qualitative, but it's a very sincere measure. To what extent does the individual believe in their body's natural ability to heal itself? Not everybody's there. In fact, most people have doubt because they've been chronically ill for a long time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so they don't have that visceral conviction. Yeah, I'm just missing the nutrients. That's all I need. Most people think they're broken. Genes are broken. My tissue's not working right. I got all these symptoms. So when people get on the protocol and they're dealing with their emotional issues and they're dealing with their dietary issues, because everyone has I've got a pretty good diet. And to ask, what is your diet? And then you find out it's not really a very good diet. And it takes a while for that to come to the forefront. But the biggest consistent response to people having to the protocol, I've got so much more energy. I'm just amazed at how much more energy I've got. And energy hides a lot of things, but it lets you get stuff done. And does everyone suddenly, do their sleep issues disappear? Does their hair loss disappear? No, it doesn't. But I have more energy today than I had 20 years ago. I have more mental function today than I had 20 years ago. I have a colleague down the street who's just a few years younger than me. He said, you are working at 1.4 of an average person. He said, I've never seen it. You're like an Energizer bunny. And part of it's my passion. Part of it's feeling like I'm helping people. But part of it is I've got the energy. I wake up feeling refreshed. My bodily systems are all working. Thank you very much. And I'm like, I'm on fire. And is that everybody? No, but it's a lot of people. And people can go to our website and look up the testimonials. We've got over 100 testimonials. We're working to get 1,000 testimonials because there's a lot of people out there that have benefited from this protocol that just go off into the sunset. And we're inviting them back to say, help us understand what happened so that more and more people know what the benefit of this approach. And it's not pride of authorship. I dusted off Mother Nature is what I did. I just took age-old principles and applied modern science to it to see how does the body make energy? And when you're making energy, what does that keep at bay? What keeps iron at bay, keeps pathogens at bay, keeps a lot of stuff begins to go out into the woodwork or out of the body. And that's what we want. And we get back to, what was the term that I was using, sovereignty? What's your word?
Autonomy, health autonomy.
I love health autonomy. I think that's a really powerful concept because that's really where we need to be. That's where our ancestors were health autonomous. They were not dependent. And here's something I just learned the other day. In the field of cardiology, modern medicine has lowered the death rate 40%. That's not bad. And I think it's in the last 20 years, a 40% drop in death rate. What they didn't document, what they identified, what they did not document is what is the increased dependence rate on drugs? And I'm sure it's through the roof. So we can lower your incidence of death, but we're going to increase your dependence on the system. Is that progress? I don't think it is. I don't think that's really what Mother Nature wanted us to do. We were designed to be sovereign, autonomous beings doing what we love to do and being able to help each other grow and have our experiences, learn our lessons. But this idea of what I heard Secretary Kennedy in a recent interview with Gary Brecka, he said, if you have your health, you have 1,000 dreams. If you have chronic disease, you only have one dream, and that's to feel better. Yeah. And he said, 60% of the American population has one dream. That is such a powerful metric of we're failing as a society. If 60%, over half of our citizens, don't have the energy, don't have the autonomy, don't have the sovereignty, then we got work to do.
Yeah. So. One place I really align with you. I align with you in many points. And one of them is that one of my favorite symptoms that I like to go away is low energy. I just believe in people feeling vibrant. And sure. So I know that's your thing as well. It's just one of those things we've almost accepted too much low energy. We've normalized it. It's almost like the stress thing. It's like we've taught people to believe that like low energy is acceptable at different phases of life. Oh, I'm aging. Oh, I've had children. You're living life half full with that thought just because we don't know that there's something else. And I feel that with the podcast, my goal is always to open our brain to there's always options. There's always options. That's my true feeling, my true perspective, that there's always options. And I'll also mention, I feel like when this started for you, which I think you said again was 2000, I think that was the beginning, not the midpoint. That is when I feel like you really started to, I'm guessing, after the 30 plus years in the healthcare industry, it's the last 15 plus years where you really started to live fully alive. And
totally.
And since we're thinking these big picture concepts, which are just like good inspirations to live through, etc., it reminds me of Dr. A. Hendricks' work, who I've had on the show. And he, I think, was the person who coined this whole zone of excellence versus zone of genius. And I think about this as like the legacy project as well to me. And I think, Morley, you're living in your zone of genius, right? You're not like stuck in this zone of excellence. Maybe you were good at being a healthcare administrator, right? Where you could have been maybe half full happily, right? You could have been lived life half full. And so anyway, I just think it's really beautiful when people find this passion that they're like, I just want everyone to know this. And on that note, people might say, Morley, this makes my head hurt, but there is you have actually simplified it. exponentially. We just didn't get to that today. So it's very much simplified in the root cause protocol. And you very much, I think, give away a lot of root cause protocol foundations for free as well.
We do. Absolutely do. Just go to the website, rcp123.org. There's a lot of information. The protocol's there. There's different versions of the protocol. People want to dig a little deeper, get the book, Cure Your Fatigue, join the community, the RCP community. We're enrolling people for the class now, the RCP Institute. If you want to take a deeper dive, we really encourage people to join us for the 16 weeks to really immerse themselves in the truth of how the body works. It's not how it's taught on the internet, most circles. And it's not complicated. You don't need to be a scientist to do it. In fact, a third of the people who go through that training are moms. A third of people like me who didn't have any license, just wanted to help. And a third of people are people with a license, wanting to do it better.
Yeah.
And so really encourage people to give that a shot. And between July and like first week in November, your neurons will be stimulated. But there's a lot, I think there's a lot of ways people can learn more about this. And I'm grateful for the chance to have this kind of exchange. And I love the gentle pushback, because there are people out there that really want to know, what about this? And I think you did it beautifully. You stress tested the concepts, and not everyone is going to bowl over and say, oh yeah, I'll just start doing the RCP. They're going to want to think about it. And I appreciate this kind of conversation to get people over that intellectual hump of resistance, because this is asking people to do things differently. So really cool.
And even though if your mind hurt at all throughout this conversation, I would just say that the really good news with the RCP is that it's very gentle and whole food based. And so I don't really see a negative personally. I'm sure you would appreciate me saying, I don't see any negatives. I don't think you can go wrong by getting rid of isolated single nutrients that are creating other deficiencies and putting in whole food sources of nutrients and filling in gaps. I just don't really see a problem with this. I don't think we have any issue. And I do think also, I think the only downside is it can take time. And so
that's just it.
And that's a thing. And that's why I weave in some other things with my practice on purpose, just to help people get results. But I want them to land with synergistic whole food nutrition for the long game. So anyway.
Makes perfect sense. No, it's great. I really thank you for the chance to have this, and we can certainly continue the dialogue. It might be fun for you to do the blood test. That's always a fun conversation. I've done that with probably 8 to 10 different podcast hosts.
That would be fun. Yeah, we should do that, because I have an original and I need to do a follow-up one. But
that would be a blast to do that.
I think I'm gonna throw in. I was actually pondering this. I think I need to throw in. I'm gonna do some really some significant. I was meaning to do this. I have, like, in the back of my mind, I want to run these experiments. And I think it's important to not run too many experiments at once, depending on your outcomes or goals, so you can know which thing. And I have time, like, it's okay. I'm not in, as I mentioned before, it's a different conversation. We do run more experiments on people when they're in more distress, right? Because we're looking for faster results. And when you support multiple systems at once, you can get faster results. For me, I'm like, okay, I would like to see how these have changed, but actually I know I have this potential iron problem, and I'd like to see what happens when I throw in more copper because I've already done food-based copper, and I just want to experiment with a little bit more. So yeah, we can plan to review that, just because that is fun. And I do think sometimes when we can apply these concepts, and I'm always happy to share how I'm like a freak of nature. Like, why is my iron 4 and my husband 7? And also, that's also great, right? To have 2 people in the same household that have these really high amounts. So there must be something in the environment, right? There must be something in the environment. So anyway, to be continued. Thanks so much for coming on today, Morley, and for helping us unpack copper.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Just keep breaking.